Hello, this is Dr. Phil. Today we're going to talk to Governors Guy Carlton and John Graves Simcoe, along with Joseph Brant and yours truly, George Washington, about the events leading to the becoming of two nations, Canada and the United States. Our first guest today is Governor Guy Carlton. Hey Guy, so are you the governor of Upper Canada?
Lower Canada.
Lower Canada, sorry. Today we're going to look at the events leading up to North America becoming two nations. So we're going to talk to all of you about your parts of the story. First Guy, talk to me about you.
Me?
Tell me about your life and how you became governor. I want detail.
Well, it began when the fortress in the city of Quebec surrendered to us, the British, in 1759. The French continued to fight, and we almost lost a major battle at Saint Foy. Peace didn't happen until Marquis de Vaudreuil, the French governor, surrendered. Canada's surrender and the Treaty of Paris in 1760 ended the feud between France and the British for control of North America. It was the Constitutional Act that split Quebec into Upper and Lower Canada. I took Lower Canada, and Simcoe took Upper.
We can let Governor Simcoe talk more about the Constitutional Act, but what happened to Marquis?
Well, Marquis was arrested and imprisoned in the Bastille when he was going into exile in France.
Okay, now how did the French people respond to your rule over them?
Well, I don't mean to sound cocky, but they loved me.
They loved you?
Well, not at first.
Define not at first.
Well, we kind of treated them like the enemy, and...
Excuse me? The enemy?
Well, they didn't get their own say in their own government, because...
Because why? Because you took advantage over them? You said how it was gonna be?
You must understand, they were a conquered enemy.
Yeah, I can see that. Hang on, so if I get on your bad side, you're gonna conquer me too? Are you like taking over the playground, Mr. Meaner?
We had no other choice but to use the army as police and army officers as judges.
No other choice? You still haven't answered my question.
Hold on.
No, you hold on and answer my question. I can't help you until you talk to me. You just what? Are you mad at me?
Yes.
And why are you mad at me?
Because you won't let me speak.
You probably feel a bit like those poor French people you oppressed.
If you let me speak, I realized the French wouldn't give up their way of living, particularly their language and religion.
So you gave up?
We didn't give up. We treated them well, paid for supplies instead of just taking them.
Whoa, are you implying that you used to steal from them?
Well...
Do you realize that this is a big problem?
It's all fine now.
Guy, don't change the subject. You're avoiding the question.
We let many French captains of the militia keep their jobs and settle minor disputes.
And that fixes the problem then?
Well...
And after almost 250 years, you wonder why Quebec wants to be another country.
After the fall of New France, French fur merchants went back to France or back to Louisiana.
So where did the Northwest Company come from?
The Northwest Company, who took over the fur trade, came from a group in Montreal formed by rowdy Scottish and American traders.
Now what about the Quebec Act? That was something with a little conspiracy in it, wasn't it? I want juice.
You see, we couldn't keep Quebec under military rule forever. Therefore, in 1774, the Quebec Act created our new conquered territory into a new British colony. This was great for the French. Good for us, but the Americans disagreed with every part of it. The act was designed to keep the Canadians loyal to Britain. It recognized the significance of the Catholic Church, reserved French law for corporate and civil matters, and introduced English criminal law. It also made Quebec larger, setting the boundaries farther north and west.
But what about the secret instructions?
I was getting to that. The Act contained secret orders to me to introduce civil law, suppress the Catholic Church, and not tell the French Canadians. Then the Bishop of Quebec found out.
Weren't there rumors floating around that you leaked the information?
That's not the point. When the Bishop of Quebec found out, I promised that I would follow the original plans set out in the Act.
Did that seem like the logical thing to do?
At the time, it seemed to respect the rights of the Canadians, but it still retained the old feudal rights of the Church and its seigneurs. The Canadians expected an elected assembly like the 13 American colonies got, but it didn't. The bond between the British and the Americans was at a breaking point. For the Anglo-Americans, the Quebec Act was intolerable and led straight to an American Revolution.
Well, to sum everything up here, you were the first British governor of Quebec, later to become governor of Lower Canada. You treated the French people reasonably well, and you enforced the Quebec Act. Thanks, Guy, and we'll be back after the break. We're back, and with us we have the Mohawk leader Joseph Brant to tell his tale and his role in the story.
Hey.
So Joseph, tell me your story and how the native peoples were involved in all this.
Well, around the Great Lakes, British and Anglo-Americans were a threat to the way of life of my people. After the 7 Years' War, they were trying to take over our ancient trade networks. Chiefs protested to British authorities in Canada, but the British didn't really help. The Scottish traders were supported by Scottish members of British Parliament. Large British factories sold goods to the Scottish traders and didn't want it to stop. Further problems were that land speculators such as Benjamin Franklin and George Washington had lots of support for their activities in Britain.
So, what happened?
Ottawa's Chief Pontiac fought the British rule by trying to unite the tribes against the British. He was a great leader, but couldn't win military support from the French. To make matters worse, Commander Geoffrey Amherst ordered soldiers to give blankets infected with smallpox to the native peoples. They were unable to fight the British because they were extremely sick and were dying of smallpox.
Hang on, Joe. Did I just hear that correctly? Smallpox?
Yeah, I know.
That's just wrong.
I know. The smallpox, along with other European diseases, killed millions of native peoples.
This is a big deal. Boys and girls, this is the use of a biological weapon against defenseless people. Joseph Amherst, you should be ashamed of yourself and your men. You are cowards. Okay, Joseph, tell me more about you.
I am a Mohawk chief. My sister is Molly Brant. People say I'm a skilled leader, a famous warrior.
Tell me something I don't know.
I'm a Six Nations ambassador, an exceptional diplomat. Brantford, Ontario is named after me. I have good relations with Sir William Johnson, who represented England. I've made several trips to England, dined with the King and Queen, and socialized with the Prince of Wales.
What were you doing in England?
I went to stand up for my people. I went to make sure my people got the land they were promised. Eventually, we were given land along the Grand River. When the American Revolution began, we were forced to choose sides. The Mohawk Nation had strong links to Britain. We sided with the Loyalists. They said we were faithful friends of the British and their cause.
What's your native name, Joe?
Theandanagia.
Well, thanks for talking with us. We'll talk to Governor Simcoe after the break. We're back, and with us is now Governor John Graves Simcoe.
Hello. When I was born, I had an unusual birthmark on the...
John, I'm going to be honest with you. This is taking a lot longer than we would have hoped, and now we don't have all day to talk about your life story. So just tell me about how you became governor and how you fit into this story.
Well, I guess we can move on. What I'd like to point out, which Guy forgot to mention, was that I was the Upper Canada governor.
He did.
Well, he didn't say that Upper and Lower Canada had an extremely low population compared to the rapidly growing U.S. At this point, the U.S. had already become separate from the British. A fifth of the Americans were strongly in favor of the British rule. There were loyalists who were in favor of the British rule, and the patriots who were not in favor of the British rule. The loyalists were persecuted by the patriots, and they burned their houses down. 43,000 loyalists decided to settle in Ontario, Canada. 8,000 went to the Maritimes. This formed a new colony of New Brunswick in 1784.
Okay.
The United Empire Loyalists wanted to be governed separately from the French Canadians. Governor Carlton agreed. So in 1791, Quebec was divided into two separate colonies. Upper Canada for the Loyalists, and Lower Canada for the French. Each got their own government with a legislative assembly, a governor, one was Carlton and one was me, and each got two councils. There were small groups of landowners and English-speaking people who would pass laws that benefited their own class and ignored the interests of others. Even though our population was a little one, things were about to change. People started coming to Canada from England. It was a 2-month voyage to Canada. For many people, the voyage was too expensive to go. So what they did was they made an agreement. It was a contract to be voluntary slaves and to work for 5 to 7 years to pay off the voyage.
They must have really wanted to go.
Until all the cholera.
We deal with a lot of that on our show. It's like taking a lot of laxatives. They would have been on the throne forever.
Actually, there were no toilets, only buckets for toilets, and nothing to clean themselves with.
Makes you more thankful for what you've got now, boys and girls, now, doesn't it? So there would have been many people coming to Canada.
Yes, in 1815, the population of Upper Canada grew from 10,000 to 90,000. Many of the newcomers came from the U.S. They were known as the New Loyalists. The New Loyalists still liked the American system of government rather than the British system of Upper Canada.
But beggars can't be choosers?
Kind of. The Americans saw this as a threat. If the British kept bringing more people to Canada, it was unlikely the U.S. would be able to seize Upper Canada. Our population grew 4 times as large by 1850. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Tell me more about the pioneers of Upper Canada.
Well, the speculators saved and kept the best land for farming for themselves, while giving the rocky and swampy land to the settlers. During the American Revolution, there were 500,000 people in the 13 colonies. Most were slaves. Most of the Declaration of Independence signers, like Thomas Jefferson, had slaves. The British used slavery as a strategic opportunity against the Americans. They offered freedom to the slaves if they became British soldiers. This would ruin the plantation economy of many American states, weakening the rebels.
Tell me more about how you became governor and what you did during your rule.
To ensure that the colony of Upper Canada would follow a British model, I was appointed first governor of Upper Canada. It was absurd to think the people could actually govern themselves. British North America needed to be protected from the United States, which is why I made defense a top priority. I built roads for the troops to move easily from west to east, such as Danforth, Dundas, and Yonge.
And these are now major streets in modern-day Toronto, yes?
Yes, I ordered thousands of hectares of land, surveyed and parcelled out. A seventh was given to the clergy, which is the church. Another seventh was given to the Crown, or the British government.
What are your views on the natives and their fights with the Americans?
Oh, I supported the natives in their fights with the Americans. I didn't really like their cause, but I thought they'd be strong allies. Under me, the Upper Canada population grew and slavery became less acceptable. Roads were built for transportation and protection.
You were really quite the governor there, Mr. Simcoe.
Please call me John.
Well, thanks, John, and stay tuned till after the break. We're back. We have talked so much about the American Revolution, but what exactly was the American Revolution? We have been trying to uncover the story leading to the War of 1812, but what was the War of 1812 and who was involved? Well, it's time that we invite one of the most famous Americans to explain this to us. Welcome, President George Washington. It's an honor, Mr. President.
The honor is mine.
Now, Mr. President, could you tell us a bit about the American Revolution and that story?
It would be a pleasure. It all started back with the Royal Proclamation. The King issued it in 1763. It cut off land speculation west of the Appalachian Mountains. The natives were satisfied because traders and settlers were not allowed to move into their territory.
Interestingly, the Royal Proclamation was never cancelled and is still used today in land claims.
Then there was the Stamp Act. It was a tax in the form of a stamp that was to be put on everything. We had no representatives in British Parliament and were being taxed without our permission. In other words, we refused taxation without representation. We refused to pay it, and many people who tried to enforce it were tarred and feathered to publicly humiliate them. So in 1766 it was repealed. It was obvious the British were in debt, so they tried to tax us on tea and other goods imported by the colonists. We refused yet again, and again it was repealed, except the tax on tea. On top of this, British troops were everywhere. We were supposed to put them up in our houses or pay for their lodging.
Could you tell us about the Boston Massacre?
In 1770, nervous soldiers misunderstood orders and fired their muskets into a mob of Boston protesters. This Boston Massacre hurt the British cause. We were on the brink of revolution. In 1773, a group of revolution leaders known as the Sons of Liberty, dressed up like Mohawks and threw tea into the harbor to protest the new Tea Act. The Boston Tea Party, as it was called, was well organized, supervised by leaders, and was certainly not the deed of a feral mob.
Can you tell me your response to the Quebec Act?
After the Quebec Act in 1774, we finally decided to take our first steps of independence.
We got off all ties to our homeland and demanded a boycott of all goods from Britain. The first shots of the American Revolution were in Lexington Green, Massachusetts. When the British and our troops were about to fight, the British told us not to shoot and ordered their own troops not to fire. One of the troops accidentally fired. This shot heard around the world caused the British to start firing, driving us away. However, when the British were on the road to Boston, we attacked, wounded, and killed many British soldiers.
What did you do then?
We Americans still needed more troops to fight the British on the battlefield. Americans led by Richard Montgomery and Benedict Arnold tried and failed to seize Quebec. I was made commander of the Continental Army, and I eventually became the first American president.
And now I'd like to ask you about the Declaration of Independence. Tell me about that.
It seemed that the independence was our only option. Some of the most famous and important people, such as Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams, were in agreement. They drafted a statement that would declare their independence from Britain. It was mostly written by Thomas Jefferson. The Declaration of Independence was an important statement of principles of democracy and freedom. However, the Declaration of Independence didn't end the war. King George and the British government enlarged their army and navy. The war continued for 7 years. This caused destitution on both sides. France sided with the Americans, us. The British lost a whole army at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. Guy Carlton surrendered the ports of Savannah and Charleston before abandoning New York, the last British stronghold, in 1783.
Guy forgot to mention that.
The colonists won the Revolutionary War, creating the United States of America.
Now finally I'd like to talk with you about the War of 1812. Everything has been leading to this, but what was the War of 1812?
By 1812, the Canadian population was 500,000, while the American population was 8 million. One of our political parties, known as the War Hawks, led by James Madison, thought British support of natives were violent acts. In 1812, war was declared. New England was completely against the war. If it wasn't for them, we possibly could have won. The war was also called Mr. Madison's War, which didn't look too promising, as the soldiers of the American militia soon lost enthusiasm. The Americans attacked Detroit and Niagara. British General Brock and native leader Tecumseh counterattacked us at Detroit. This victory of the British convinced many settlers to remain loyal to Britain. The first years looked promising to the British, but the next years to come would be difficult. The British lost some battles, and we lost some battles. In the end, Tecumseh, who saved Upper Canada, died while fighting a rearguard action. The largest battle in Upper Canada, the British won at Lundy's Lane. The British also defeated us at Chrysos Farm. Around this time, Napoleon lost at the Battle of Waterloo, and the British sent the Duke of Wellington's army to North America. At New Orleans in 1815 was the final battle.
And in 1867, on July 1st, Canada became a nation 52 years after the War of 1812.
How rude! Did I ask you to speak?
Well, I just wanted to say...
No! Shut your mouth. Sit down.
I am sitting down.
I don't care. Shut your mouth. So, in a nutshell, after the Treaty of Paris, which ended the fight for British North America between the British and the French, Governor Guy Carlton was made governor of Quebec. In 1763, the Royal Proclamation limited the growth of 13 colonies. In 1765, the Stamp Act was passed and was repealed the next year. By 1774, the Quebec Act was passed. In 1775, the American Revolution began. The next year, the Declaration of Independence was written. The American Revolution ended with a victory in 1783. The Constitutional Act created Upper Canada for the English and Lower Canada for the French. The War of 1812 begins in 1812, and by 1815 it ended. Canada was finally made a nation in 1867. It's a big nutshell, but I hope you'll remember it. I'm Dr. Phil, and thanks for watching.
We do not endorse or support psychology or any opinions expressed in this program.